Hello, Ms. Briscoe here. Today in this lesson, we're going to be going over our interactive notes for our social studies lesson. These notes you want to complete with me as we go through them, and you can pause this video as much as you need. You will be placing these notes when you are finished in the social studies section of your interactive binder. That way you have them to reference as you're completing your assignments and any review that you need for any projects that we'll have coming up. Our learning goal for today, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight it here, and I'm using the program Sketch, which you can use Sketch or Top Notes, whatever you're comfortable with using when editing a PDF. You could also print out these notes and just write on them, whatever you're more comfortable with. So let's go ahead and I'm going to highlight our learning goal, which I'm going to make it a little bit thicker. So our learning goal for our social studies lesson today is I can explain what lines of longitude and latitude are and what they are used for. So I want to know, what are lines of longitude and latitude and what do you use them? What are they used for? Why do we have them? So the first part of our notes, Earth is in the shape of a sphere or ball. It is separated into sections by imaginary lines. So we know that Earth is round and it's in the shape of a ball. And it's separated into imaginary lines, and we're going to learn about what some of these imaginary lines are called. Because when you look at a globe or a map, you see all of those lines, but if you were looking at Earth from space, you're not going to see any of those lines. They're imaginary lines that people have created. Maps have distortion. Distortion means to not have the same shape as the original object. So if you're looking at a map, it's flat, it's not round like the Earth, and it has a little bit of distortion. That means that it's not going to be exactly the way that the Earth would look like if you were looking at it from outer space. A globe has less distortion because a globe is round, and so it's the same shape as Earth when you look at it from space, but it's not necessarily the same size. If we come down, the equator is like an imaginary belt around the middle of Earth. It divides Earth into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the tools over here. I can make a circle, and I'm going to make it blue. And I can go ahead and resize it here. So I have this circle, and it's not an exact circle, but this is going to represent the Earth. And what we're going to do is I'm going to draw a line that looks like an imaginary belt that divides Earth into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So let me go ahead and draw my line. Okay. So that line, we are going to say is the equator. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little arrow pointing to it. And then I'm going to come over to my text and I'm going to type equator. And so this way, I know that that little line, I have a picture to go along with my words up here. So if you were to look at Earth from space and you see this line, you're not going to see it. It's imaginary, but it divides the Earth into the northern and southern hemisphere. And so we're going to add some text in there. And we'll write northern hemisphere. We'll stretch it out a little bit so that can go up here, and we'll do southern hemisphere. And we'll stretch that out a little bit. So what these notes will help you in the future is you can come back and look at them and find out, okay, what is the equator? Where on Earth would it be? And you can see that it divides the Earth into the northern and the southern hemisphere. Why is that important? Well, if you were trying to tell somebody which hemisphere the United States is in, this would help you to decide. And you can look at a map that actually has the continents and oceans on it, and that will And you can find the equator on the map to find out what continents or oceans lie in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. So let's come down a little bit. Another major imaginary line that we have is the prime meridian. Now the prime meridian is another imaginary line, but unlike the equator that runs east to west, the prime meridian runs from north to south. So let's go ahead and put another circle here. Oops, I've added a little too much. So let's go ahead and resize this circle. There we go. We'll move him down here, get my drawing tool, and I'll change the color. So for our prime meridian, it runs from north to south, and it cuts the earth right in half, just like the equator. Now it looks like we're going to be writing in blue. So we can draw a little arrow to our prime meridian. And see how easy it is to move these things around sketch. Alright, so I have my little arrow. Now I want to add in my text. Okay. Line that up next to my arrow so that I know that the prime meridian is that imaginary line that divides Earth straight down the middle from north to south. And I can go ahead and change my typing. And let's go ahead and write our hemispheres. So this is going to be our western hemisphere. Spread it out a little bit. So our western hemisphere is on the west side. And we're also going to have our eastern hemisphere. And our eastern hemisphere is going to be on this side. So anything on this side of the prime meridian on Earth is in your western hemisphere, and anything on the right-hand side of the prime meridian is your eastern hemisphere. So those are two of the main imaginary lines that Earth has. We have the equator, which is like a big belt around Earth, and we have the prime meridian, which goes from north to south. Now these are going to be really important imaginary lines for you to know and know why or what they separate Earth into. So you're going to know that the equator separates Earth into the northern and southern hemisphere, and that the prime meridian separates Earth into the western and eastern hemisphere. It's important to know these imaginary lines so that if you needed to explain where something was on Earth, you could use these as sort of a direction. Now the last set of imaginary lines that we are going to learn about is longitude and latitude. Again, longitude and latitude are imaginary lines so that you won't see them from outer space and you don't see them as you're walking around the Earth on the ground because they're imaginary. But these lines you will find on most globes and most maps. Now they're imaginary lines, kind of like the prime meridian and the equator, but they're more specific. They give more of a specific location on Earth. They divide Earth into kind of like a grid. So I'm going to put two circles here because we're going to do one that has lines of longitude and one that has lines of latitude. Okay, and my circles aren't perfect, and that's okay because it's still going to give us the idea that we need. And my lines of longitude and latitude aren't going to be exact longitude and latitude lines, it's just going to be an example. But when you do your practice, you'll see the exact lines of longitude and latitude. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pen back out, make my lines skinny. So the first set of imaginary lines that we're going to learn about are lines of longitude. Now lines of longitude run from north to south. So the prime meridian is like a line of longitude. So I'm just going to draw some lines that go up and down and that they cut Earth into sections. Now again, this isn't exactly what lines of longitude and latitude look like, but this is just an example for your notes so that you can remember that lines of longitude run north and south. So let me do a little arrow. Point it here. And then we're going to type in longitude. And that's going to help us to remember that those are lines of longitude. And let's type a little bit about lines of longitude. They are vertical lines. Make that not a capital. Vertical lines that run from north to south. So that can help you to remember what lines of longitude are. And so let's go ahead and make some lines of latitude. So lines of latitude are like the equator. They run from east to west, or west to east. So we're going to draw some lines. Remember, these aren't exactly what lines of longitude or latitude would look like, but it gives you an example that shows that these are lines that run from east to west. And as you can see, the sketch program lets you add in all the lines you want. So let's go ahead and add in our arrow so that we can point to our latitude lines. And move it up next to that arrow. And then let's type a little bit about latitude lines. Latitude lines are horizontal. That run from east to west. And those are interchangeable, east to west, west to east. They run from left to right around the earth, or right to left. I'll move that down there. So that's going to be your notes, and these are notes that you can come back to remember these lines of latitude and longitude to help you see how they would go around the earth. That latitudes are horizontal and longitude are vertical. And the prime meridian is a line of longitude, and the equator is a line of latitude. So now you have met your learning goal. You've learned a little bit about what the lines of longitude and latitude are and what they are used for. Why do we have these lines of longitude and latitude? Because if you are out in the ocean, there's no street names or buildings to be able to describe your location, are there? No. You would have to know how to find your location using the lines of longitude and latitude to give a description of where you are, or say in the desert. You're not going to have street signs or buildings there to give directions. So that is why they are important and what they can be used for. You're going to have some activities that are going to help you deepen your knowledge about the lines of longitude and latitude and about maps and globes. All right, guys, have fun with your assignments.